Welcome back, everybody, to Gearhead Daily. Eric here, as usual, and beard, mustache on point, which means that I'm ready for the day. And I am here with Jeff Schwartz, and I've been looking very much to this conversation for a while, actually about a week and a half so, because this is technically your fault. All of this, me doing this, me sitting here buying all this equipment and everything is technically your fault, and I'll explain. I met you back when you had an Ultima GTR, and it was yellow. And I just thought that was the coolest, neatest thing I'd ever seen in my whole life. And you were busy being mobbed left and right with people. So when it came time for me to build my SLC, I called you, and you answered and graciously accepted my idiocy and questions. But you said,
Well,
Eric,
I think if I could interject here,
go
when you
ahead. Yeah.
told me, I don't think you were quite sure about what you wanted to build, whether it was
Right.
Ultima or SLC. So I think we had some conversation, and I may have steered you in that direction, possibly. So
You did, because you were working on Stacy David's SLC at the time. You were doing his turbo setup, if I remember correctly. And you had said, well, if I were to do it again, I would do the SLC over. The suspension was good, and you felt like the stuff was better built overall. And I thought, okay, cool. So all of this is technically your fault, because if I hadn't done the SLC, I wouldn't have posted some YouTube videos. I would not have been invited to do VinWiki. I would not have been kept going on with the videos. And this is all essentially your doing, by the way. So it's good to have you on.
well, I guess I'll take credit for being my fault then. So
Yeah, and to be really frank, and I'm gushing a little bit here, but you have had some really impressive success over a very long period racing. I know motorcycles, and you collect motorcycles now, and some of the older vintage dirt bikes and stuff, and the road racing stuff. And I remember seeing you run a lot of the Street Machine Nationals, or back at CarCraft, the Real Street Eliminator, that sort of thing. And I remember, I don't know how many of those you've won, but it's more than one, I know.
yeah, I think as a company, I want to say 9 times as a company, and not all of them were mine, but
Still.
the last one I won was, I think, the late model class with my CTSV, probably I don't know, a few years ago. But yeah, that was kind of a thing that I did for a while.
So I have to ask you this. There were some rumors going around that you found a loophole in the Real Street Eliminator Challenge, and there's actually a couple rules because of you in that series. Can I ask you about it?
Actually, there is some rules in a couple of different series. I think, yeah, and
Because of you.
yeah, I mean, that Ultima GTR kind of set a high standard of what a guy could build in his garage.
Yeah.
Eventually, I changed it to twin turbo, and I won the I think it was the inaugural 0 to 200 to 0 thing out at the Silver State Classic in Nevada. So, I guess the Optima series that I've been participating in on and off for a few years. One of the rules in there has to be a production,
Yep.
built car for so forth. So that was a rule. I'm pretty certain was because of the Ultima GTR, because I took it to a number of different competitions, and CarCraft essentially banned it the first year I showed up with it, and
Right.
so forth. So yeah, that there's been some rules that have been
Well, I think that's something to be proud of, in my opinion. And I have taken some of those lessons and like, all right, well, if the rule book doesn't specifically say this, then you can kind of do, as long as it doesn't ban it, then it's allowed.
I suppose, but some of the organizations have different wording now that
Right,
if
right.
it's not mentioned, it's illegal or something to that effect. Like if we don't say it, check with us first or something to that effect. So
Right, right. So for those, let's backtrack just a tad, because I had to get that out there. This is all your fault, but in a good way. But for those of you who may not know who Jeff Schwartz is, I don't know. Give us some background about who you are and what do you do.
Well, I don't really need to get into the super long story because
Sure.
I actually do have a Wikipedia page. So
Oh,
it,
nice.
it's Jeff E Schwartz, one of the few living hot rod builders that actually has a Wikipedia page, because
Very
usually
nice.
after you die you get that.
Cool.
But anyway, I'm grateful that I have that. And I mean, essentially, you were talking. We had chatted the other day, and one of the things you had mentioned is like the thread that shaped you, I guess.
Sure. Yeah.
And at a very young age, my father was a car guy, but he passed away when I was an infant, and he was very young. He was like 22 years old. Got ill one day, polio, and like a week later, he was dead.
Wow.
So knowing that my whole life, I don't remember him or anything, but I've obviously inherited some, car, gearhead traits. But knowing that my whole life, I've always, knowing that our time on Earth is could be limited. We really don't know. We all have the appointment, and we don't know where it is.
Mm-hmm.
So I've tried to live my life, fully, and really, tried to enjoy things, and do things that I enjoy doing. Live life with a little bit of gusto. I enjoy every sunset to this day, and I appreciate every sunrise. And a lot of us get wrapped up in the hustle bustle of our lives, and we don't ever sit back to smell the roses, I guess you'd say, or appreciate the moments we have here. So that kind of shaped me at a young age. It's like, gee, if he died that young, I could die that young. So it was like, I wanted to get a dirt bike, so I got a job and saved money to get a dirt bike, and started racing motocross when I was 16. And parents didn't help out with that sort of thing. I had a paper out when I was 12. I did a horrible job castrating pigs when I was like 14, which was a job I did every single week, 200 pigs every Sunday. And it was a funny story about that is Mancow has a radio show in Chicago, and he had a thing probably, I don't know, it was maybe 10 or 15 years ago, that he had this thing like, call in and tell us what the worst job you ever had. So I called in and told him about that job, and he thought I was lying, and he hung up on me. It's like, I swear to God, that was the truth,
Yeah.
So anyway, as a kid, I just was motivated to enjoy things. Dirt bikes were a passion, cars were a passion. I built model cars as a kid, and I had a pretty in high school, I took all the machine shop classes and learned to weld when I was like 12 years old. And
Mm-hmm.
I had an uncle, Henry Leisman, in northern Minnesota. He was kind of a snowmobile pioneer. He was one of the first factory-sponsored Arctic Cat racers that raced for Arctic Industries, they were called. And he had a machine shop, and he manufactured like handlebar assemblies and a lot of stuff for the snowmobile industry. And he took me on a tour of his shop one time. I don't remember how old I was, probably 6 or 7 or something like that. And it was incredible. He had these machines that would like shear real thick metal, and so he made a couple little sample pieces, and I took them to my show and tell in school. When I got back home. But I always was fascinated by making things. So so anyway, I didn't go to college. I went into machine shop work after high school, and made stuff. And that morphed into a manufacturing career. And then I guess the short story, 15 years ago, I lost my job, and I didn't know what I was going to do. And my friend Andrew Borden, you might know him.
I don't.
He's one of the moderators on the Pro Touring forums, and
Okay.
good friend of mine. He sat down with me one day, and I was kind of depressed and on the verge of losing everything. And he says, look at it. He said, don't be depressed. Look at it this way. Now you're free to do whatever you would like in the world. And I thought about it for a minute. I first immediately started making excuses like, yeah, but I don't have the money to start a business, and most businesses fail because of underfunding, and I don't really have the money to start a business. Well, he said, if you could do anything in the world, what would it be? And I said, well, I'd kind of like to build hot rod cars. He says, well, there you go.
Mm-hmm.
And in my previous life, I had managed manufacturing plants. I mean, I started in the shop, worked my way up into plant management. So I was pretty much familiar with how how business operates, obviously.
Yeah.
So I thought about it a little bit, and it's like, I do have a 401k, and I could probably take a little bit of money out of that. I have no income, so I don't really care about, paying penalties. So I had a lot of tools and things at home. So I had built my 82 Fleetwood Brougham and my Ultima GTR at home in my garage, So those had gotten some magazine coverage, and at the time I lost my job, the Ultima had just started hitting the magazines, and I think it appeared in like 33 magazines actually, including
it was
every
huge
import magazine
mm-hmm.
on the planet Earth. So anyway, that's kind of how I got into hot rod business, I guess. Is I rented a little 1,500 square foot building, and Murray Paff connected me with Jimmy Day, and Jimmy Day was attempted to take over a company in Wisconsin, and some things fell apart there, and he had a client that needed a car built. So Jimmy Day gave me my first big job, and
oh, nice.
I'm eternally grateful for that.
Yeah. I've known Jimmy a while, and he thankfully, graciously, and then I don't know if it was stupid or if he was just being nice, let me drive the Optima car at a chump car race, at like a 10-hour enduro, and trusted me enough not to not to kill anybody, let alone myself. So my experience has been that Jimmy will give you as much time as you need. He's just been super nice every time I've ever talked to him. So that's been my experience.
Yeah, and then the fact that I had gone to a lot of events, like Carcraft Summer Nationals and Hot Rod Power Tours before I ever started the business. And a lot of guys, when they meet the magazine guys, they run up to them and it's like, oh, you gotta look at my car, or you gotta shoot my car for your magazine, or my car should be in your magazine, that kind of stuff.
Right.
And when I met all those guys, I was genuinely interested in what they were working on at home,
Mm-hmm.
So the conversations I had with those magazine guys that I met in the early days, like, Jeff Smith and, Roe McGonigal and,
oh yeah,
all those guys, was, what are you building at home? What kind of stuff are you working on,
mm-hmm.
And I really became friends with those folks. And then when I did end up losing my job, it was like, they were, there to help a friend, I guess you could say. So, those guys I'm eternally grateful for all of those guys. I'm sorry I didn't mention everybody, but, they know who they are, pretty much everybody in that industry. Nowadays it's still important for that type of stuff to happen, because when you get a magazine article, it actually ends up online and is searchable as well. So we've had last year 6 cars on the covers of magazines last year, and
wow.
all the relating on online stuff that comes with that. So eternally grateful for all those folks.
That's pretty impressive. And I know you did some racing, dirt bike racing back in the day, and I know you were fairly successful at that. So kind of how did you, I know you said you lost your job and then started transitioning to making cars, but I guess most people watching this, if they don't know your full story, would say, oh, he's a chassis builder. So I guess how would you say you became known as the chassis guy?
Well, I guess I could back up a little bit. I wanted to go. I loved racing dirt bikes, and then the car racing kind of, I guess, gave me some experience that ended up being chassis stuff. But
mm-hmm.
The car racing, I wanted to go racing cars, and I ended up buying a Corvette and got involved with the local Corvette club. And the very first year of doing autocross, I won the Midwest Regional Championship NCCC.
Nice.
And then a friend of mine took me up to the June sprints, and I watched my friend Fletcher Belt race Formula V. And while I was up there at the June sprints, I saw showroom stock cars going around, and I like purpose-built race cars, don't get me wrong, but I always gravitated towards street stuff. So anyway, that kind of interested me. So I ended up, I bought a GT1 Corvette, and as a roller, and from it's kind of a weird circle of circumstances, but I bought it from Paul Michoud, who owns Blackhawk Farms Raceway right now.
Okay.
And I recently built him a Corvette, and I actually ran his manufacturing plant for a number of years. So it's kind of weird how those people you meet, end up coming back into your life for different purposes. So, but how I got into road racing and chassis was, I wanted to go road racing. I bought the GT1 car. It was just too expensive to campaign, so I ended up going showroom stock racing. I set 5 national track records. I won the June sprints, had pole position at the runoffs, and then I went IMSA racing for a couple of years. And I was kind of chasing that dream of being a professional race car driver. The biggest almost a no cigar deal that I had was Renault Racing had this program in Europe, and I was running a Renault in IMSA here, and they it's actually morphed. It still exists today, that program. It's now called the Red Bull Driver Search.
Okay.
Back then it was called the Renault Winfield Cup or something like that.
Okay. Yeah.
So they had said, hey, if you want to extend your racing career, you might consider coming over to Europe and trying out for this deal. So they had a deal where you drove this Formula Renault turbo car around Circuit Paul Ricard for a week.
Sweet.
And you paid money to do so, but then you had a shot at coming back for the final selection at the end of the year. So I was in the first group of Americans to do the Winfield driver selection deal over in Europe, in France. And so at the end of the deal, they said, Jeff, I was in the first group of Americans, and they said, you're really, we have a dilemma here. It came down to you and another guy, and we can't really decide, but we can only pick one. So we picked the other guy. However, it was so close that if you want to come back here for the final selection, we'd be glad to have you, but you'd have to pay your way.
Okay.
And since I had just, maxed out my credit cards with about $5,000 worth of expenses to get there,
right,
and I just completed a season of IMSA racing on my nickel, I was kind of strapped. So I elected not to go. Turns out that the other Americans spun the car, which was automatic disqualification, and a guy named Gerhard Berger got the ride, who went on to Formula One fame, finished second and third in F1 a few times. And I believe last I heard he was running an F1 team for maybe BMW or somebody.
Okay.
But that was my closest thing to almost but no cigar. But I decided at that point, if I wasn't gonna, if I was ever gonna have, a house and, kids and send them to college and do all that kind of thing, I couldn't have that needle in my arm, the racing needle in my arm the whole time. So I decided to kind of, back off from the search to be a full-time pro driver. And then, I went back to my roots of autocross and that kind of thing, and track days. So how I ended up in the business was just basically losing my job. And I believe the racing experience of not only the motocross, where it teaches you how to adjust suspensions, damping, compression damping, rebound damping, spring preload, that kind of thing, that really helped me, I guess, with shock setup. And then, the road racing, kind of gave me a level of experience where, the chassis stuff kind of morphed into that. So initially the stuff was built under contract. I teamed up with a guy named Kevin Latch from Janesville, Wisconsin, and he had been dabbling in muscle car chassis a bit. And one of my customers, Robin from Arizona, had kind of hooked the two of us up, and he basically designed the first chassis for us, manufactured them, and then eventually he sold his company to Rich Bickle, ex NASCAR driver, and then Bickle eventually sold me all the jigs and fixtures, and we started manufacturing in-house, I think in 2010, maybe 9,
Okay.
something like that.
Yeah. So that does bring up something for me, which is this is more recent, I'd say in the past, I don't know, 7 or 8 years that you've kind of taken off. Is that right?
Well, I think we introduced the first muscle car chassis in 2006.
Okay.
So there was an article in Chevy High Performance that Henry D. Published that was
I know
basically the
Henry.
first muscle car chassis. So we were the first company to come out with a bolt-in muscle car chassis, and that was 2006. And then from there, everything has kind of just grown. Initially we had 7 chassis. When I bought the jigs and fixtures from Bickle and started doing it in-house, it was 9, I think, and now we've got 33 bolt-in chassis. So we've had continued growth from the time I started business. We've had continued growth, continued steady growth, and to where we are today. And I don't really see that as actually slowing down.
And so, how many folks do you have on staff right now?
Right now, we have 25 on staff, and those are
Wow.
all full-time employees.
Wow.
And our shop is 25,000 square feet. Some of the other guys that we're competing against have been at it longer than we have, quite longer than we have. So I think our 2 main competitors are 40 plus years in the business, and we're like 14 years in the business. So so that's how we got in the chassis business, and then obviously when I started building cars, and then shortly thereafter we were doing engines, and then we were doing chassis, because I didn't really know where the business was going to go. So we kind of, did a bunch of different things, kind of did whatever we could to make a buck. And then, eventually you kind of find your place in the world. And right now, we still do engine stuff. It's mostly modified crate engines at this point.
Sure.
We've developed our own cams on the dyno and things like that. And then, we also build cars for customers. I think I've got about 15 to 20 cars right now in the shop. Some of them are nearing completion, and
Nice.
others are just getting started. So we've got a bunch of cars that we're building at all times, and then chassis. We've got guys building. We got a staff of guys that just strictly work on chassis every day.
Nice. And I was having a conversation with a friend, and for privacy reasons, I'll just avoid who it is. But basically, they were consulting with another company, and this company was looking to grow and that sort of thing. And the advice they gave this company, which I thought was pretty interesting, and it's almost like the formula that you fell into, which is build a car, show up to a bunch of events, kick total ass, and people notice. People will take notice of you. I mean, is that? It kind of boils it down to like 2 sentences. That's almost kind of what you did.
Well, I did some of that. There's no doubt. But I guess there's more to it than that. It's not quite that simple.
Well, yeah, of course. I mean,
but I guess that's that's one avenue. That's definitely one avenue of it. But I think there's lots of people out there. Obviously, I'm not going to give up my exact recipe of
sure.
success, but
Yeah.
There's a lot of people out there that can build cars, and can build cars well. But there's more to being in business and doing well in business than just being able to build a car well, So,
oh yeah,
there's marketing, there's, being able to be personable with people. There's a whole bunch of other things that go with it, So, what you mentioned, going out and kicking ass with a car, that's a good start, but
sure.
a whole bunch of other pieces got to be into place to make it all work for you.
Well, you bring up a good point, and this was brought up by I don't know if you saw the interview I did with Kirsten Stone a couple days ago, but she previously worked for Comp Cams, And what she basically said in so many words is, yeah, you're buying a product, but you're buying from that person who's selling you that product. And if you don't have a decent relationship with that person, it doesn't matter how great your product is. If it's, if you don't trust that person, nobody's going to buy from you.
Yeah, and I think that is important. And one of the things that we try to do here is we don't have our sales staff consists of myself and my son Dale. The two most knowledgeable people in the company about our product. So that's just how we choose to do it. There may be a point in time where I have to back away from that, and we have salespeople, but we people can always actually get me on the phone, and I run the shop actually here, and I do sales
Mm-hmm.
sales calls. My son Dale does sales calls and does purchasing as well, and he's also involved in sales marketing. So I think it is important that the people that are selling your product actually be very knowledgeable about
Oh,
it
mm-hmm.
and passionate about it as well. So
Right.
I've been disappointed when I've talked to companies,
Mm-hmm.
uh, representatives, and I'm trying to buy something and they don't know anything about it. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
probably the most common thing that people can identify with is when you go to buy a new car, and especially if it's like a specialty car, and you've done your research about the car and you know more about than the guy selling it to you.
Right.
That's disappointing.
It's just some middleman at that point.
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah. So a lot of folks would know you from your chassis and that sort of thing. So I guess one of the big questions a lot of people may ask you is, if let's say I've got a stock Camaro, Mustang, whatever, what just the instant kind of bang for your buck improvement in ride control and ride improvement, like handling wise, if you had to say what would be the first step? We'll forget tires for a second, but what's the first thing a guy should do, you think?
Well, I think that um, if you analyze what most people do to their cars, it starts out usually as bolt-on stuff,
Yep.
and bolt-on stuff, works well. Brakes, obviously, everybody always goes for horsepower, number one, but they forget about brakes. You know what I mean?
Yep.
So probably the most, underfunded thing that people do on their cars is they don't put enough brake on it. And
So
then,
yeah,
and then,
I have to interrupt you. I'm sorry,
sure.
because here's another thing that's your fault. I just remembered this. This is your fault too. So I remember when you bought your C7 Corvette and you went to the factory and did the experience where you build the engine, and I thought that was cool. And I'm like, God, I don't have $5,000 to do that, but that would be cool. That'd be one of the coolest things to do. Build your own engine. And we were at Road America and we were talking, and I said, oh, what do you think of the car? And you said your favorite thing about it was the carbon brakes. And this is your fault. So when I sold my SLC and kind of moved on, had another couple cars in between, and then I said, okay, well, I'm going to do the Corvette route. Just what the heck? I'm just going to go for it. They push button and the thing works. It's crazy. And the C7 prices at the time were a little bit out of range, but I could afford a C6. And I looked for cars that had the carbon brakes because Jeff told me the carbon brakes were the best thing about it. And you're preaching to the choir when you say like one of the easiest things you can do and most overlooked things. It's the number one safety item in a car, besides the driver, of course, is your brakes. And so when I went and looked for it, I looked for cars that had specifically carbon brakes, and those were only two options. Found out there were three options, but there was you could get a carbon, the 2011 Carbon Edition C6, or you could buy a ZR1. And what I found was I found the Z07 package, which is what you have on yours. They did that on a couple of them for the C6, and I found one, and that's the one I drive now. And it is, I love getting people in the car and show them a little bit of the horsepower, and they're like, ooh, whatever horsepower. And I go, but let me show you the real reason why I bought this car. And we're coming up to I do it every time. Come up to a stop sign, and you can start seeing them. They're starting to like, oh God, like slow down. And I've got my foot in the pedal and, you know, jam on the brake real hard. They come forward. They just like, oh my God, what the hell was that? And we're, 100 yards from the stop sign. And I said, this is the reason I bought the car. And that is your fault. And that's why I have that Corvette in the garage right over there. So
well, that's a great story. I'm happy I influenced you in that one. Because you'll be a lot safer now because of it.
And you weren't kidding. You were not kidding. You get a good set of tires under there, and the braking is unreal. Absolutely unreal. I love it.
So back to what else I would do. I mean, sway bars and like on a Chevelle, the best thing you could do is a pair of sway bars and a quick ratio steering gearbox.
Okay.
And then if you go beyond that, you should just buy a chassis, because if you're going to go spending any other amounts of money, new rear end, you might as well just buy a chassis, because, the original one flexes like a wet noodle. Modern horsepower, you can't really, it can't take it. The horsepower levels have gotten insane. And
yes,
then
they have.
The unibody cars, we offer frames that bolt into a unibody car, which is, very unique at the time we came out with them. And
right.
You can take like an old Mustang, they flex like a wet noodle. You try to jack it up or put it on a lift and the door gap's changing and all this kind of stuff. And, another thing people don't remember is when you put all this horsepower in the car and you don't reinforce anything, windows crack, windows pop out, paint cracks, your bodywork will crack.
Yeah, because the whole thing is flexing.
It's twisted. It's twisted. So, you're going to spend, I don't know what you spend on a paint job, but generally, paint job is about 20 grand for us,
Yeah, for a good one.
So you do 20 to 25 grand on a paint job, and then it starts cracking in the quarter panels because the car's twisted, or your windows start cracking,
Or when the alignment guy comes in and goes, "Did you know the front right of your car is 1.5 inches higher than the back left?" Right?
Yeah. And speaking of cracked windshields, have you heard about the McLaren 600 LTs?
No.
Well, they're having some windshield cracking problems, and one guy said that the dealer told him, well, the chassis is so rigid that the windshield's cracking, and it's like, the opposite. That's the opposite,
Yeah.
Windshield's cracking because the chassis is flexing, and
right.
it's a carbon tub, so how do you fix that?
Well, this leads me to my next kind of question. You've owned and worked on a lot of cars. If you had to pick, and I'm going to put the proverbial gun to your head, what's your favorite car you've had that you've driven? Well,
that's a tough one, because there's a couple I haven't driven yet, so I'd like to try them out. But it's a tough one because I like visceral experiences, and I also like different experiences. So, like in the motorcycle realm, I've got, Ducati V-twin, I've got Aprilia V4, I've got ZX14R inline 4-cylinder, I've got a BMW horizontal opposed twin. All of those engines have unique sounds, and with cars, I really, with cars and bikes and anything mechanical, I just love the different sounds, and I think, a variety that way is really kind of cool, so that's a tough call. But, I drove a GT3 RS recently around a racetrack, and
nice.
It's like, that car has a really great exhaust note for being a flat six,
Yeah.
And 9,000 RPM, anything sounds pretty good at 9,000 RPM, And usually, and I should probably suggest this to folks, if you want to have these life experiences, because we talked about living life to its fullest here earlier.
Of course.
But if you want to live life to its fullest, and I did not wear this T-shirt on purpose today, but it's Exotics Racing, EXR. Yep. Whenever I go to Las Vegas, they have this place out by the Speedway called Exotics Racing, and there's another outfit called Dream Racing, and I've been to both of them. And they have this whole fleet of cars that you can rent and drive around the track.
Oh, yeah.
So you basically sign up and sign a waiver and whatever, and they put a driving instructor in the car with you, and you can drive them around a racetrack. And if you're a good, experienced driver, they recognize that, and you can pretty much go flat out around the track and try these cars out.
Nice.
And it's not really that expensive. So, you know, $395 for maybe 4 laps or something like that. It depends on which car it is, but you know, they got everything from like a, you know, Cayman up to a Ventador, you know.
Right.
And you know, I spend a little bit more than $395 because I usually go there and try 3 or 4 of them out. But I mean, I've literally driven, you know, almost every Lamborghini model, and you know, Ferrari 458, 488, F12, a couple of Lamborghini race cars, the Super Trofeo Gallardo race car. What's that?
Any of the GT3 Lamborghinis, like the full-on race cars?
The Huracan Super Trofeo, which is actually has more horsepower than the GT3 because
they're limited.
You know.
Yeah.
Anyway, anybody can actually go out to Las Vegas with a driver's license, go there and pay money and drive these around a track in a controlled environment. I mean, you can also go there and rent them and take them out in the mountains, but that's a little dangerous and sketchy trying to, you know, stomp on a car on a road you're unfamiliar with and that kind of thing. But it's very reasonable. And so I've driven a lot of different things, but I think, you know, I love Italian things, you know, cars, furniture, you know, motorcycles, you know, they have this sense of style about them, you know.
Yeah.
And then, you know, the visceral experience. I'll just throw one out there recently that was just a milestone car for me that I didn't expect.
Yeah.
So I stopped by a friend of mine's place. We call him Gavi, and he's in Barrington, Illinois, and he's got a business there. And I just was in the neighborhood one day, and I pulled in there. I'm driving my 800 horse CTSV. I think I went to the hospital for a stress test or something, and I was in the neighborhood. So I pulled into his place and just to say hello. And he's kind of a passionate Italian with Italian cars. So he's got a couple of Ferraris and Maserati and Alfas and Fiats and Ducati motorcycles. And so he's very passionate about his country. And he says, I just got this car. You got to take it for a ride. And it's a Alfa Romeo Giulia Quadrifoglio. And it's the high performance version of that. And I've been reading about them in the magazines, this and that. And I'm kind of looking at it, and I'm kind of looking over at my 800 horse CTSV, and I'm thinking, I don't know if I'm really going to be impressed with that thing. It's a twin turbo V6, you know?
Yeah.
So I get in the thing, and the interior was the most pleasant place that I've ever planted my ass. Okay. It was like carbon fiber trim everywhere. The steering wheel was carbon. The seats were carbon fiber. The cover down below the seat where the controls for the power seats was carbon. Everything was carbon in this thing, and it was red and black leather, and it was just this gorgeous place to be. And he says, you got to put it in race mode. So he kind of reaches in over me and pushes it in race mode, and we fired up, and it's got this really cool sound for a 6-cylinder. And he take it out a little bit. So I take it out and I, you know, stomp on it a little bit, and it's like, oh my God, this thing launches like a top fueler. And it's a rear-wheel drive car, but the traction control, you know, Alfa's kind of part of Fiat and Ferrari and all that. And they have an F1 team, and, you know, they have perfected the traction control where it's non-intrusive, you know?
Yeah.
And for not being all-wheel drive, I thought maybe it was all-wheel drive at first, but I was just so impressed by that car. And, you know, you can buy like a second-hand one for like, you know, 45 or something. So,
really,
I mean, that's a heck of a deal, you know,
yeah.
One of them things. And so anyway, that was a car that just shocked me about how great it was. You know, the most fun car that I've driven on a track is probably the Lamborghini that I was telling you about, the Gallardo Super Trofeo. The Huracan Super Trofeo is only rear-wheel drive. The newer version is rear-wheel drive only. The Gallardo Super Trofeo is all-wheel drive. So
Mm.
As you know, with having high horsepower vehicles,
Hmm.
all-wheel drive gives you the opportunity, like, hey, if I'm bored with this, I can always like chuck a turbo on it, and I'll actually hook up that horsepower.
Yeah, and it is fun when, especially when you kind of get into that boost range and it's four-wheel drive and all four wheels start to grip at the same time. It is an unreal experience when they hit, because rear-wheel drive, it starts, the back end does this a little bit or whatever, but that four-wheel drive, when that kicks in and you get into the boost, it throws you back in the seat. It's an unreal experience.
Yeah, I've not driven anything super high horsepower with all-wheel drive, but the the Super Trofeo car that I now have in my garage is 600 horsepower in it. It's
Yeah.
perfectly adequate. Around Road America, I was 4 seconds a lap faster than my Z06.
Wow. Wow. And I think the Z has a little bit more horsepower than that, right?
Like 720 is what I'm got right now.
Yeah, and so that just I think that goes to that mid-engine platform and kind of why the Corvette went mid-engine, I think.
I agree with you. I think that as a relatively old guy,
Hmm.
I hate to admit it, but I'm a relatively old guy.
Yeah.
A lot of the folks that that have been around Corvettes for a long number of times are kind of not really digging that mid-engine thing. But man, the younger folks are just gaga over that thing, and I really like it because I think based on what they said when they announced the car, that the front engine platform just doesn't get enough traction, basically. So,
Yep.
going to the mid-engine will allow them. I mean, if you think about that, the Z06 was marketed as going 0 to 60 under 3 seconds,
Yep.
and now they've got basically, is that a LT2 or something they call it?
Sounds about right, because it's the upgraded LT. There's been like three versions over the years, but yeah, this is the newer. But it's only what, 500 horse. It's not. Oh, it's not crazy.
495 with the
Yeah.
performance exhaust, and it goes 0 to 60 in the same under 3 seconds. So
Yeah.
that right there tells you that they're getting all that to the ground.
And that's the base model.
Right. Yeah,
That's
that's pretty.
So here's the big question. Are you going to buy one?
Well, am I? Well, uh, I'm not going to buy one for myself. I can tell you that. So
Okay. All right. For the shop to tinker with, maybe.
I doubt it, but I
Yeah.
doubt it. Anything's a possibility. But I think it's a great car, and I think my wife likes it a lot, so that could be a avenue.
Yeah. Well, if I found, if you can get the wife on board, you're golden through damn near anything. Has been my experience.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
And she likes the mid-engine one, and she gave me permission to go out and buy one. But she said, "Well, you got to trade in the current car." And I said, "Oh, I don't know, because I really like this car. I like the C6. It's been a really good car, and it's fun, and it's just everything works. AC works, the radio works. I mean, I'm in hog heaven."
Well, my friend Bob just recently upgraded from a C6 to
Hmm.
a 7, like a few weeks ago.
Okay.
And I don't know if you looked around at prices on C7, but they're giving the darn things away.
Yes, they are.
Like they produced quite a lot of them in 2019, and
Hmm.
and I think they made a few extras to uh, compensate for the line being shut down in between models, so they had cars to sell.
Oh yeah, and they've been sitting on lots, haven't they?
Yeah. So anyway, he ended up getting a Grand Sport
Okay.
and
Yeah.
got it from one of the high volume dealers, and I think he got about 15 grand off a sticker
Wow.
for a brand new one and
And
a Grand Sport.
yeah.
And his comment to me, I saw him last Saturday night at our local charity car show that happens once a year, and he said the biggest difference that he felt was the quality of the interior. He said was
Oh yeah.
was way upgraded. And the one thing that he mentioned was, he said in the C6 the seats flex, and he said when I get in there the seats kind of flex and they move around, and
They do.
said it was really annoying to me. And he said the new one is just like rock solid. When I get in it, the seat is solid, holds me in place. And he's not a big guy; he's just an average sized guy. But that was what he said was he said every generation the interior and gets really a lot nicer, and that's what he said about it. But performance, I think you can't beat a C6.
Yeah, and then for the price of a Z car is getting extremely reasonable. I mean, it's kind of I've seen them in the 30s for a low mileage Z06. I mean, and they're for the money. I mean, my God, you can't get much better.
Yeah, and just about any car you can think of, they depreciate quite a lot. And there's so many good cars today. I mean, if you think about the muscle car of the 70s, like what we're living in right now is so phenomenal. Like, that silly Alfa Romeo four-door sedan that I talked to, I incidentally went and looked at what the quarter mile time was on that in one of the magazines, and it was like 11.9 at 122 in a quarter mile,
Nice.
from a V6,
Yeah.
So, buying cars secondhand is really, there's so many good cars out there. It's like they're all depreciating because there's so many good ones to choose from. You ever price out what like an Aston Martin V12 is these days?
Like a used one?
Yeah.
They're like 50, right? Somewhere in the 50s.
You can get a V8 one for 50, but
Okay.
you can get a V12 2015, a real clean one with literally 2,000 to 4,000 miles on it for like under 100. Okay, and they were 220 new.
Yeah.
A 15 that's less than half price.
Yeah.
In just a few years, So.
Well, that brings up a good question. Because like you said, if you took that Alpha car back in the 70s and tried to race guys in your little V6, you'd have been laughed at. But you would have ripped off half their doors and driven home with air conditioning and listening to the radio. So where do we go from here? Because we're throwing these, modern chassis under muscle cars. A lot of guys are. I did it myself and had a blast doing it. So where are we going from here?
Well, I can answer that kind of simply with you mentioned that Alpha pulling up next to an old muscle car back in the day. What about that Alpha pulling up next to a Hellcat right now? Okay.
Yeah. Yep.
And that Alpha jumps out of the hole and the Hellcat just spinning the tires. Okay.
Yeah.
Because I've been to the drag strip and I've watched lots of Hellcats run low 12s, because they're spinning,
Yep.
So basically, it's got to be all-wheel drive. So that's where we're headed, and I'm really enthralled with that Hellcat Charger wide body that they just announced recently.
Okay.
They're putting the wide body as an option on the Charger now.
Nice.
And it'll be available on the like the Scat Pack as well as the Hellcat, and that's a really a modern kind of fresh looking car. Doesn't try to look retro, but with that wide body, there's been photos around the internet. It looks badass, but again, it won't hook up. It'll spin the tires. So it's going to be all-wheel drive. If they come out with an all-wheel drive version of that thing, you can make a Hellcat 1,000 horsepower relatively easy.
Sure.
So, but it ain't gonna really hook up on the street. The Track Hawks, one of my friends, Jesse, that tunes cars.
Yep, I know Jesse.
Has been tuning a Track Hawk, and last I checked with them, I think they were like 900 at the tires or something, and they had run 9.1 in a quarter mile, hadn't cracked the 8s yet, so they were trying to get in the 8s with it.
That's fast.
And the gentleman drives it every day. He's got drag radials on it, and he drives it every day. He's a daily driver.
So as far as where do you see the enthusiast market going? Because, it's the trend. Whoever the generation, whatever their car was at the time, whenever they start getting some disposable income, they start getting to my age or, between mid 30s and 50-ish, whatever the car was of their day, right? becomes the kind of the next big thing, and then they start swapping stuff into that and doing famous things. So kind of where do you see the enthusiast market going?
Well, there's a couple of things. I think one, as we see more all-wheel drive production cars hitting the streets, which will be happening pretty soon.
Mm-hmm.
I think you'll start seeing more all-wheel drive hot rods being built. I've been wanting to do an all-wheel drive muscle car for a long time. I've had a couple of customers use our chassis to build an all-wheel drive muscle car. So I think, with the horsepower levels the way they are, even in the muscle car realm, they'll need to be all-wheel drive. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
So that's one thing as far as like the drivetrains. I believe in the very near future, we'll start seeing more all-wheel drive hot rods being built, and it'll have to happen once we have some of these production car things. You can get parts from a boneyard basically to do the all-wheel drive.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, you're kind of limited to Trailblazer SS stuff or Escalade stuff or things like that. And then as far as models of cars, right now in our shop, we've got 3 GBody cutlasses.
I was gonna guess GBody.
Okay.
I had, in my head I had GBody.
So we have a 70. I think either a 79 and a 78, or they're both 79s. We get 2 of the early Cutlass, and then there's an 83 Hurst Olds here.
Okay.
And they all have chassis under them. The Hurst Olds is getting a 450. Actually, it's got a 455 Olds with the CJ Batten heads and all the go fast goodies, that the best stuff you could put in an Oldsmobile. And then we have another one with a big black Chevy, and then there's another one that's just stock here, and then actually I have an 87. So there's actually 4 of them in our shop right now, G bodies. And then the other thing we're seeing is third gen Camaros and stuff like that.
IROCs and stuff.
Yeah. So that's kind of stuff. And then I guess I don't play video games, but a lot of video games have muscle cars in them, like some of the car video games. So, I'm seeing some of the younger generation guys, like at car shows, 14, 15-year-old kids come up to me and they're admiring the muscle car because they have one on their video game or something, So
they had style, man.
That's probably going to help influence them to some of the older cars, but they're not going to want a restored 69 Camaro SS 350. They're not going to want that.
Yeah, that's been my experience too. That the survivor cars, while they're cool, they're not kind of the hot ticket item. They want folks want the look of a first gen Camaro with the nice lines and everything. I mean, they really did hit a home run with that car, but they want to have it drive and act like a modern car.
Yeah, and when we're talking about demographic shift, is I guess what we're talking about.
Yep, right.
Have you looked at what Model Ts and Model As are going for now? Like
no, I haven't.
Ts and Model As.
No, I haven't.
You can't give them away.
Really?
You can buy a fully restored one of them for under 10 grand.
Really?
And it's like the people that were into them aren't here anymore.
Yep. Yeah, exactly.
And then we've all seen the auctions on TV. Have you seen street rod prices? I mean, you'll watch any one of the TV shows on the auctions, and you'll see these, well over 6-figure street rods selling for 30, 40, 50 grand. So it's like.
I think that time has kind of moved on a little bit. My experience watching those auction shows, like you said, the demographic has shifted with the generations, and there's just I don't know. There's just no nostalgia for an old 30s, hot rod, like the old classic, like ZZ. I'm thinking ZZ Top sort of classic hot rod,
Yeah, I think there's some years of cars that'll always kind of be iconic and have like a place in the world and maybe retain some of their value. And those are like 32 Fords,
Yep.
Like a 32 Ford is going to be forever a hot rod, and Tri-5 Chevys, those aren't
Oh, yeah.
Couldn't ever be unpopular.
Boxes.
I mean, I think they're starting to wane a little bit now, actually, the Tri-5s. And then, 69 Camaros is kind of that car of the I guess, younger generation a little bit. And then, I don't know what the next one is after that, whether it's G-Bodies or third gens, but it might be both of those.
God, I remember a time when G-Bodies, you could buy a G-Body 80s Monte Carlo, even a bubble window one for under $2,000. I remember a time because they were, they had that just anemic 305 that was in there, and nobody wanted them. Nobody wanted them.
Yeah, those cars have really come up in value, and
Yeah.
I think that the limited edition ones with the big back windows and stuff, the Aero Coupes and that, the Pontiacs and the Monte Carlo SS, those even I think restored ones of those, I think will be the next, say, Copo Camaro down the road or something. Down the road, those will be like a ZL1 Camaro or something crazy.
Right. So, it's amazing how fast an hour flies by, when you're having fun and having a good time. Folks can find you at schwartzperformance.com. Is that right?
Yeah, and my Instagram is Jeff middle initial E Schwartz, so Jeff E Schwartz on Instagram, and then Schwartz Performance.com, and we're on Facebook as well, Schwartz Performance Inc.
Yeah, I always enjoy seeing your stuff come up because you got such a wide variety of different things that you do. I've, on your Facebook anyway, you've got the motorcycle stuff, you got the car stuff, and it's really easy to see all your stuff in the magazines and stuff. I see that all the time. But for those who are, interested in chassis stuff, that's your website, schwartzperformance.com. And I don't know, any parting words for folks who have hung on this long?
Well, I think, next time we need to have a conversation about maybe vintage dirt bikes or Italian cars or something, or European cars or something, right?
Well, if it only with only one, you have to promise me that you take your computer out to the garage where you have all the Italian cars so that we can all at least look at them in the background.
Well, I don't have that many Italian cars, but I do have
more than I got.
I do have a few cars.
So, Jeff, I want to say thank you. Appreciate your time. Like I said, it is amazing how fast an hour goes by. But I know we've just kind of scratched the surface of what you're doing, kind of your experience in the car world, because like we started off, there's a lot of rules that it's kind of your fault why there's a specific rule about something, and to me, that's something to be proud of, because that means kind of you did something to piss off a few people, which is always in good fun, in my opinion. So. I want to say thank you for your time. It's been great. And we need to do this again for sure.
Well, it was great talking with you today, and I thoroughly enjoyed it.
Thanks, man.